A very good morning to all our viewers, wherever you are tuning in to your favorite Sunday morning show, Media Monitor. I am the lady with all things news, Alicia Aali. So let's find out what is making headlines at this hour. Pay television Mnet has expressed optimism about its relationship with media personality Gareth Cliff. He was reinstated as an Idols SA judge after the High Court in Johannesburg ruled in his favor on Friday. Judge Caroline Nichols found that a contract existed between Mnet and Cliff. The media personality's urgent application to demand his reinstatement was granted with costs. Orlando Pirates and Kaizer Chiefs have played to a 1-1 draw in an ABSA Premiership match at the FNB Stadium out in Soweto. Thamsanqa Kabuza cancelled out Willard Katsanda's first half goal early in the second half. Chiefs dominated the first half and Pirates were the better side in the second stanza. Health officials in Colombia say the number of pregnant women reported to have the Zika virus has more than doubled in just a week to more than 2,000. The number now stands at 1,900 cases. The mosquito-borne disease has been linked to birth defects in Brazil. All right, let's now have a look at some of the front pages of our Sunday newspapers. There's the Sunday Times, and it's leading with a story about President Jacob Zuma's political allies who have allegedly broken ties with him over his close ties with the Gutas. The City Press there leads with the headline of the passenger rail service PRASA, investigators who have uncovered alleged corruption in the tender process involving locomotives. That's the Sunday Independent, and it's leading with a story that questions consultation between government and associate partners over tax retirement reforms. That's the Weekend Argus, leading with the same story of the controversy surrounding the new tax laws. And last but not least, it's a Sunday Tribune leading with a headline about a multi-billion rand scheme and also with the mysterious 6 million rand found in a bakkie that has not been claimed. All right, let's welcome our first guest this morning, Ms. Thandeka Qubule. She is SABC Economics Editor, and she's joining us on the topic of the newly raised rates. A very good morning to you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us on Media Monitor.
Hi, Alicia. Thanks for having me.
All right, Thandeka, now with the recent announcement of rates going up by 50 basis points to keep the inflation under control, consumers will suffer the brunt of rate hikes. Let's take a look at this.
Weekend, and the prices of the goods are going up time and time. You see, and then there's no job for the people. So I was thinking maybe if the government can at least give the people the jobs, you see. This gives us a very, very challenge that how are you going to survive, how are you going to live?
I think with the drought and with the exchange rate, I think cost push inflation has become quite substantial. So definitely, I think everyone's feeling it from the higher earners right down to the lower middle class.
It's going to really affect us in a big way because it's going to set us back since our salaries are not even going up. And we have a lot, like I'm a single parent, so I have a lot on my plate, so it's really going to affect me in a big way.
The global economic conditions are not conducive, but I think if we can make better decisions, the government can make a better decisions. We can have a better place where we can say, yes, things are not well, but our normal citizen can actually survive. So to me, it's at the top. Really, we are not making good economic policies for our people.
All right. Well, Thandeka, you know better than me at this. Simple terms, why raise the interest rates? Was it necessary for the country?
This is a controversial issue and it depends on where you stand. But clearly, the Reserve Bank is determinedly hawkish on interest rates. And I was running through the newsroom earlier and I heard a statement made on air by a commentator on economic affairs, and the statement struck me as apt. And the statement was that the Reserve Governor had a successful operation where he raised the interest rates. But actually, when you consider the economy to be the patient, he killed the patient.
So now, what impact will the rate hike have on the following food prices, which are driven by drought, the weakening currency, wage inflation, as well as the proposed tariff hikes in Eskom?
Tighten your belt, Alicia. It's going to be an expensive year ahead.
Look, Thandeka, I heard also a commentator, an economist, saying that inflation is not really caused by demand. Please explain this debacle to us.
Well, inflation is basically the erosion of the value of money. And there are a number of inflation drivers in our system at the moment. But if you look at the weak rand, which is what got the Reserve Bank jittering recently, it's determined by exogenous factors, external factors, and the rand trades in a basket of currencies that are subject to volatility. These emerging market currencies, especially those that are currencies that are determined by commodities, because of the low commodity prices globally and the weakening of demand from China, what we see is a lack of appetite for commodities, and therefore those currencies that are commodity currencies are exposed to low, weak prices at the moment.
All right. Now,
there are, Alicia, some idiosyncratic factors, domestic factors. Economic policy uncertainty is one that was flagged by the ratings agencies, and one that we need to keep a tight look on domestically.
But now a lot of people are scared, Thandeka, saying that should the announcement then raise alarm bells of a looming recession? We spoke about this late last year.
The big R word is a very, very scary word.
Yeah.
Our Minister of Finance has said that he will do all he can to avert that eventuality. And we are... never has a budget speech been more anticipated than the budget that he's due to deliver in February, because we'll be looking at it to see how he's going to avert a recession and how he plans to avert further downgrades. Unfortunately, the Lekgotla meeting of the ANC, the ruling party, was a bit thin on details on how it also plans to advise government on economic policy to avoid these two calamities, a recession and a downgrade.
Look, Professor Sipho Seepe is going to give us more on the Lekgotla, Thandeka. I hope you're correct in those statements. But now, look, let's talk about, ways forward. How can then consumers ease the financial pressure to keep afloat in these hard times?
Well, before we talk about the consumers themselves, there is a role for our economic policy planners to take a step back and re-look at the situation more carefully. For example, let me give you the example of the US Fed. Faced with a recession and economic collapse, it went dovish on interest rates. It went gentle on interest rates. And a Keynesian era, which is basically a way of managing monetary policy, was introduced in order to ginger up growth in the economy and to promote employment. Now, the US Fed has a dual mandate, unlike our own. Our own Reserve Bank is solely and exclusively focused, and the Reserve Bank governor did seem to allude to this in his statement on Thursday, solely focused on the inflation targeting mandate, whereas the US Fed looks at a whole number of factors, and it has a dual mandate to target both inflation and unemployment so that it calibrates those two. Now, our Reserve Bank, by focusing exclusively on inflation, punishes things like output and employment creation. And it's going to be a very, very difficult year for unemployed people, people who are about to lose their jobs in the mining industry, 10,000, I believe, and ordinary people like you and me. And we need to really relook at the policy space and see what tools we can bring out of the toolkit for managing both monetary and fiscal policy and begin to innovate.
Thandeka, at this stage, I mean, as an economist, is it possible to forecast when the economy then will start to recover? I mean, we saw the Greek Odyssey last year. We know that Nigeria is also struggling with the oil prices, but I mean, the oil prices are also picking up. But can we forecast at this stage when the economy will start to recover?
I'm a mere journalist, really, and I don't think there are economists there as well who can really tell.
So it's a matter of time.
But it's all dependent on China and how this Chinese remodeling of the Chinese economy pans out. And the Chinese have warned us that the next 5 years are bound to be difficult as a result of what's taking place in their own domestic economy and their new economic priorities and the new route to progress that the Chinese people and their government have chosen for themselves.
So you do recommend belt tightening? That's the only solution?
Belt tightening and economic innovation. We cannot absolve our economic architects of the task of sitting down seriously to think about how to take us beyond this impasse, how to cross this bridge with us, because we are all in this together.
Tell us more about economic innovation. I mean, what should we be looking at as a country?
You know, we should be thinking about the fact that when you impose so much austerity on a people, social strife proceeds. Austerity is the one that brought about the huge changes in politics, the huge reconfigurations in Southern Europe,
yes.
The rise of Syriza and Podemos to become anti-austerity movements. And maybe we are giving wins to an anti-austerity movement down the line in South Africa.
Look, there's a whole issue with Iran. I have to ask you this before I let you go, and we're going to talk about it later. But what do you think the lifting of sanctions on Iran will do to South Africa? Is it going to be of any benefit for us?
Yes, it's of benefit to two companies that were South African companies invested in Iran. First of all, there's MTN, which had a whole lot of dividends pooling up in Iran that they were unable to repatriate to South Africa. Now, the lifting of sanctions means that that money now is available to MTN, and I saw the shareholders showing some glee at that as well. Yeah, well, good for them. And then Sasol as well is a South African company, a former parastatal that's exposed to the Iranian economy, and it's likely to improve the fortunes and bring a rosy complexion to the balance sheet of Sasol.
I like that, a rosy complexion. Thandeka, thank you so much for your time here on Media Monitor. That was Thandeka Qubule, our very own economics editor. Coming up after the break, what lies ahead for government this year? We'll have more on the ANC's Lekgotla shortly after this break. This is Media Monitor. Thank you very much. This is Media Monitor. Welcome back. Your views are highly appreciated on our Twitter page at SA Media Monitor. I get to share some of those with our viewers throughout the show. So start tweeting and have your say. Now, the outcomes of the ANC Lekgotla are government's bold actions to grow the economy. The ruling party also addressed racism, unemployment, and said it's working hard to create jobs. Here's more on this package.
While accepting the challenging emanating from the depressed global economic climate, the pressure on emerging markets, and sluggish economic growth, bold actions are expected from the government to grow the economy inclusively, avert the possibility of a credit rating downgrade, because if we get that downgrade, we are just a notch above what is known as the junk status. And create an enabling environment for more jobs, decent work, sustainable livelihood. To this end, we must, one, engender consensus between all key stakeholders to help stabilize the economy, save jobs, restore fiscal sustainability and credibility.
All right, now in this discussion of the ANC's Lekgotla, let's all welcome Professor Sipho Seapo, a political analyst. Sir, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us, Prof.
Good morning.
Look, Prof, what was your overall impression about the outcomes of the ANC's Lekgotla?
Well, first of all, the ANC Lekgotla is directed by the General Aid Statement. The ANC has clear processes. And if you go to the General Aid Statement, there's a clear concern about the issue of the economy. And of course, the pressures that emerge from the competing opposition parties like EFF. Mm-hmm. So you need to make sure that you do address how the issue of the difficulties that people are facing. Secondly, the ANC Lekgotla would have also to comment on what needs to be done in terms of preparation for the local election. But most importantly, as you link the local elections, you must also be factoring the issue of the relationships between the various partners of the ANC that are going to play a role. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that emerges is whether the COSATU, SSCP were going to support the ANC on the elections. Mm-hmm. And my position has always been, yes, they will. But this issue of the tax has actually created a tension, because one of the concerns that members of the COSATU, and of course even NUMSA, had always raised the issue that you guys are simply voting for the ruling party. You are not shaping the discussion and the direction of policy. Mm. So just before elections, then you have the president signing these tax laws that the workers are unhappy about. And in here you see now mudslinging, the COSATU claiming that they've been lied to, and of course the president saying on the other hand that, but we have had consultation. Mm. So there is that particular standoff. But the ANC Lekgotla, understanding the importance of the local election and the role of COSATU in it, has actually volunteered itself again to say we'll actually resolve this tension between the state as well as the unions.
Look, Prof, Thandeka was just here and we were talking about, the newly raised interest rates. And she says that she felt that this wasn't properly addressed during the Lekgotla in terms of ways that government is going to deal with the impasse.
Well, you have to also understand that in the ANC, you have ordinary members who come from the branches who are elected. So the technical details and how the market works and all those things, these are not the things that you actually expect the party to get involved in, because those are not economists. So effectively what will happen is that these issues will have to be packaged by the Minister of Finance in such a way that as he was directed by the General Aid Statement, mm-hmm. that you need to put the people first. Yes. That in the end, the government's role is to keep hope alive. That even if you have challenges, but we have a plan. So I think what you're going to be seeing in the next coming week is government also responding to some of the concerns that the ANC has raised, to say, where are you in terms of the economy? And of course, Gwede Mantashe was also the first, that there is no need to be always panicking and coming up with new policies every year, every 5 years. What you need to do is to stick to your plan. And they do have a plan which the president outlined earlier of a 9-point plan. The issue is how well are you doing in that, and to what extent is that plan responding to the challenges that the population is facing. I mean, you had the fees must fall. Yes. The government was forced to shift a little bit to respond to that. At the same time, you have Pravin, who has pressure on himself to make sure that there's also proper financial management, to make sure that there's prudence in how you spend the resources of the state.
Look, Prof, what do you think of the NC's call to review all the trade agreements that were actually entered into by the democratic government since 1999 following the AGOA saga?
Well, I think it's proper. Remember, we were new kids on the block, and we wanted to be liked. So every position where they said sign, we signed. And we actually prided ourselves that the doors are opening. But we never looked carefully at some of the restrictions and constraints that are imposed by being all over the show. So in a sense, it's the same as not with foreign policy, that we are almost everywhere. And the question is that do we need to be everywhere? Actually, we have more embassies than even the United Kingdom. Actually, we're second to the United States. But people used to say we're pushing beyond our capability. So those are issues that we need to look at. And actually, I think reviewing almost everything in terms of where we should be going in terms of the mistakes is something that is actually proper.
Prof, let's go back to the COSATU and the new tax laws. Do you think this is going to be a very big issue, especially looking at the elections that are coming up? What do you think it's going to do to, the elections?
Well, I think it puts the presidency in a tight corner because remember what is most important, and it's not an unreasonable position by workers. It says if you're going to use our money and you may have good intentions, talk to us. And also there is a view that says government must stop treating the citizens of this country as if they are children. And I do think that the ANC is volunteering in mitigating or discussing this matter would actually come up with something where there's a possibility where it could be that why don't we suspend or alternatively move to a situation where there is an option. The intentions are very good, but at the same time respect the people because the people have a way in which they had planned to use their money. But simply to say we know better than you and we are going to guide you like your children is something that COSATU and ordinary people find very offensive.
Look, Prof, we heard in the January 8th statement that a lot of people were expecting the president to outline, the kind of reforms they're going to take in addressing another big issue this year, which is racism. Now, do you think that issue of racism, which is currently making headline news, was adequately addressed at the Lekgotla?
Not at all. I think the ANC has always had a very pragmatic position. It has always wanted to pretend that racism is not a problem. Even when you listen to the president after the ANC's General 8 statement, he was almost talking about that it's simply a few individuals. It is not, South Africa is not a racist country, but this is a racist country. They've been actually outsmarted by the DA that has actually acknowledged that we are a racist people, that race continues to play a major role in terms of how it affects black people, even in terms of access, whether it's universities, in terms of progress of representation. If you can find that universities where you have the most educated of our people unable to deal with racism, what more about the rest of society? So the ANC must actually get out of that notion that says talking about racism makes you racist. Actually, we should be race conscious, but not racist. We must acknowledge that we have a problem, and the problem is there for all to see.
Thank you so much, Prof. That was Professor Sipho Siepe. He's a political analyst, and he was giving us a wrap of the ANC's Lekgotla. Don't go away. More Media Monitor returns after this short break.
technology isn't all scary. There's also fun stuff like gaming.
Lots of women do play games, whether it's on their phones or their tablets.
Then there are Africans who are using new tools to make other people's lives much easier.
We typed the whole CV on a small, QWERTY Nokia phone.
For all these and other technology and social media news, join me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time on SABC News.
Can you just...
Welcome back to Media Monitor. Now, the Johannesburg Labour Court has found the employment equity plan of the South African Police Service unlawful. The court ruled this week in favour of trade union Solidarity that the plan amounted to a quota system and therefore contravened the Employment Equity Act. We are now joined by Mr. Terry Bell via Skype, and he's a labour analyst we hope can give us an in-depth look at the South African equity plan of the South African Police Service. A very good morning to you, Mr. Bell. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning to you, Alicia.
All right. Now, Terry, what is your take on this court ruling and its implications as well?
Well, the implications are very simple. It had nothing to do with employment equity, the Act itself, or with the Constitution. What it had to do with was discrimination, which is actually illegal in terms of both the Act and the Constitution. Obviously, the South African police will have to go back to the drawing board in terms of their not employment equity policy, but policy of promotion.
All right. Now, Terry, look, you've just spoken about it. I know we're struggling to hear you, but we're going to try and see if we can still continue with this conversation. The Employment Equity Act was met with quite a resistance by a number of companies from the inception. Is this court ruling not going to then open another can of worms?
I don't think so. Fundamentally, we have to go back to the Bill of Rights, in particular, Section 9 and Paragraph 2, which make it clear that there can be no unfair discrimination. Fair discrimination means trying to correct historical wrongs. What that really means is if, perhaps, for example...
All right, unfortunately, Terry, I'm going to have to cut it there. We are having a serious problem in trying to get that signal through. I can't hear a thing you are saying. All right, let's quickly go to our next story now. The heads of African states have assembled in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, for the 26th African Union Summit. And high on the agenda will be the conflicts plaguing the continent, like the ongoing crisis in South Sudan, as well as that of Burundi and Somalia. And to give us a wrap, of course, of the African Union Summit, we are joined by SABC's contributing editor, Vuyo Mvoko, who is out in Addis Ababa. Vuyo, a very good morning to you. Give us a wrap of what's been happening at the AU Summit in Addis.
Well, thank you very much, Alicia. Well, the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon held a briefing a short while ago. Well, he spoke on a whole range of issues, but of course he was also asked some questions with regard to Burundi, with regard to the reforms, UN Security Council reforms. As many people will remember, President Robert Mugabe, the outgoing president of the African Union, yesterday, really making some serious points around the whole UN Security Council reform situation, how things have hardly moved. And listening to the Secretary General of the UN, he was really tiptoeing around the issue, and he didn't seem to have the sort of answers really, I guess, anyone would be looking for. But of course, it's a big problem. It's a problem, I guess, way beyond what he, as the Secretary General, can possibly do. But what it means is that yet another UN Secretary General bites the dust without the issue having been resolved. I guess the question is whether Africa will, perhaps together with other nations, be able to make its presence felt at the UN and drive this issue and really fight for the reforms that everybody agrees are much needed. A bit of an irony, perhaps. Some people would say China is a friend of Africa, but it is not prepared as also to really relinquish its status. Burundi also came up with the UN Secretary General seemingly unable really to find his way through that one either. I mean, appealing to members of the African Union to really try and do something. But he also commended them for the efforts so far. He also commended them for the movement that he said he was seeing in places like Somalia with regard to the fighting Al-Shabaab there.
Look, Vuyo, the issue of the 5,000 strong troops being sent to Burundi, I know that Ben spoke about this and he did indicate that he fully supports this. But then when are we going to know, like, a final decision? Is it going to be taken at this summit?
Yes, there is an AU decision around Burundi. The move to send a peacekeeping force into that country was rejected. But as many people who have been looking at our coverage would recall, we did say that about 3-4 days ago that that issue, I mean, there wasn't going to be a resolution that says troops should be sent to Burundi. Apparently, a big problem was the fact that those who, when the idea was mooted, it wasn't arrived at properly. In other words, conventions or procedures were flouted from what our sources told us, which then meant that the AU was a bit tight. It really didn't have much ground because it was the situation was compromised even before discussions took place here at the summit, Alicia.
Look, Vuyo, I saw President Robert Mugabe there teasing at Ban Ki-moon about, of course, the member states and wanting, I think proposing in a joking way that why don't they get full-time membership? Was this further discussed?
Well, it's a big issue. It's been an issue for decades. I guess the question is whether President Mugabe's comments yesterday were in a sense, or could be interpreted to be marching orders to heads of state to pursue this issue beyond what they have been able to do up until now. Can Africa start a revolution, so to speak, that will see this matter being attended to, bearing in mind that the big powers have said it in as many words that they are not prepared to relinquish their privileged status. So the question, I guess, is whether come next September, when all these leaders converge in New York, will this campaign gain more impetus, and will anything happen? Are the big guns prepared to do, anything differently? We will see whether that, in fact, will indeed happen.
Look, for another issue there was, of course, the peacekeepers being their image being tarnished by, the claims of abuses, the various abuses that some of them have been charged with, and then them going into Burundi. That was going to be a contentious issue. Was that further discussed also?
Well, the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon yesterday spoke really in a bit of detail about how sad they were as the United Nations, and how humiliating it was that soldiers who were representing this big world organization sent there to help vulnerable people were the first ones to exploit them, sexually exploit them, rape them, some of them being made sex slaves. He regretted that and promised that the UN was indeed going to do something about it, but also it's going to ensure that it puts systems in place that will guarantee that nothing of the sorts ever happens again. And he really did express his regrets and sent the message to the world from the United Nations, saying, it's something that never ought to have happened, and something that will hopefully never ever happen again.
Another contentious issue there was, of course, the issue around the International Criminal Court. What was said on that?
Well, a few days ago, about 4 days ago or so, South Africa made a presentation to the Executive Council around that very same issue. Not so much canvassing for people to back it on the al-Bashir matter, but to make sure that everyone is on the same page. In other words, there's a common African position. They were arguing that you cannot, on the one hand, say we are not going to cooperate with the ICC, and on the other hand, take people to the very ICC, even though some people argued that those who are being taken to the ICC at the moment are former president, and so it's in no way flouting the current, or in contravention of current agreements. But I understand South Africa tried to drive a point home that says we need to be consistent. Whether someone is a sitting president or a former president, there has to be one line that says no cooperation with the ICC. But at this stage, I'm not really sure as to whether there was or there is a resolution on that particular matter.
Vuyo, thank you so much for your time here. That was Vuyo Mvoko, SABC contributing editor, live to us from Addis Ababa at the AU Summit. All right, let's now try once again with Mr. Terry Bell via Skype. And of course, he's a labor analyst. And we're trying to get some insight, at the South African equity plan of the South African Police Services. Terry, let's try once again. I mean, we wanted to hear what is your stance on this court ruling and its implications.
Well, what it boils down to is that the South African Police Service is going to have to go back to the drawing board, because what they have done has nothing to do with employment legislation or the Constitution. It amounts to unfair discrimination, and that's what it's all about. They have, for whatever reason, favoritism, nepotism, or some other reason, have actually used employment equity as an excuse for a promotion attitude or approach to promotions, which is obviously unfair.
Look, Terry, maybe you can give us an overview of what this means. Are there any hidden benefits of this plan, though?
I don't think so. I mean, one of the arguments is that if you promote people don't necessarily fully qualify, they'll be trained into the job. But that's never the intention of the legislation, or certainly the Constitution. They should Section 9 of the Constitution, particularly paragraphs 2 and 3, which make it perfectly clear that one cannot unfairly discriminate solely on the grounds of race, color, ethnic, social origin, sex, religion, or language. The point about discrimination comes when you have, say, for example, 3 candidates of roughly equal ability and equal promise for the job. In that case, you give the job to the candidate from the most historically disadvantaged community. And let's face it, of course, we inherited definitely levels of advantage. But that's very simple. But it's not at the cost or the expense of efficiency, productivity, or other standards.
All right. Look, before I let you go very quickly, Terry, there seems to be a lot of disputes now with the latest plans by government. What do you think the real issue is here? Is it a communication problem on government's part or what?
I think there's a communication problem, and I'm quite horrified, actually, when I speak to people at various levels in the state service, etc., don't really know their Bill of Rights, let alone the Constitution. And, this is something that needed to be clarified, that we have very good legislation, we have excellent Bill of Rights, and if we stick to that, we can obviously correct the historical injustices, but at the same time, not get into a mess of nepotism, of favoritism, etc., of buying posts. I mean, that's been happening as well. We obviously are opposed to that, both legislatively and constitutionally.
Thank you so much, Terry, even though we're struggling to hear you there, and we did try him out online. That was Mr. Terry Bell, a Labour analyst, and he was joining us on the line. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Coming up next, we unpack the AU summit. Well, we've already unpacked that. You just stay right there. We're going to talk about Iran.
The big news is Newsroom.
We also stream live on YouTube.
Whether you're at home, at the office or at the gym, wherever you are, Newsroom is right there with you. Bringing you all the latest news, updates, sports, weather and everything in between. Get all the latest news you need on the go via live streaming on our YouTube channel. That's Newsroom, weekdays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
Back to Media Monitor. Now, Canada will follow the United States and European Union in lifting economic sanctions against Iran in order to ensure Canadian businesses aren't left behind. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister announced this week. We're very pleased now to be joined by Mr. Naeem Jinnah, Executive Director from Afro-Middle East Center, to tell us more about the Iranian developments. And of course, Naeem, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Look, Naeem, in basic terms, what does the lifting of sanctions actually in Iran mean for South Africa? Any benefits?
Well, it means quite a bit. Certainly there are benefits, and one of the most obvious ones for a country like ours that doesn't produce oil is the fact that more oil coming onto the market means that oil prices will decrease. I'm sure many smaller oil producing countries won't like that, but that's the immediate impact of more oil coming onto the market. So we can expect that will happen. Of course, you know, one of the things was that in the past 3 years or so, that we've not been purchasing our oil directly from Iran. We've been buying Iranian oil through third parties. But we've still been paying the same amount. So the fact that we'll now be buying directly from Iran just means that it'll make it easier for us to purchase and to transact and to transfer money, etc. But the net effect of more oil coming onto the market will be that prices will go down. There are other benefits, of course. Iran has been very friendly with South Africa and remains so. South Africa remained a friend throughout the sanctions period. And so there's the possibility of South Africa taking advantage of a large market. And you saw recently Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa was there with like 200 business people. So there's construction, there's petrochemical technology, all of those kinds of things.
Explain more. I mean, a lot of people want to know, in layman's terms, the industries that are likely to benefit from this.
Well, one is construction. We have a big construction industry that operates outside the country. Then South Africa has petrochemical technologies that Sasol and those kinds of things that have been useful and might be useful in the Iranian context. With the sanctions, of course, Iran has in a sense, with some of these things, not been able to keep up fully. with the rest of the technology. So those kinds of things. Then, of course, telecommunications. MTN is already a big player in Iran, and with the easing of financial sanctions, that will improve. So there's a number. Then there's the service sector that would like to go in. So there's a number of those kinds of possible benefits. We shouldn't think, however, that it's all kind of rosy and great.
Somebody said it's a rosy addition, basically, to the current outlook. And I was going to ask you just now, Naeem, with the the interest rates being hiked, also, how is this now going to try and aid that current impasse? Is it going to have any effects on it?
Well, I don't know that the interest rate hike is going to make a big difference between our trade relations with Iran. But the point I wanted to make was that what Iran also, the lifting of sanctions also does, is in a sense it gives South Africa some competition. I mean, there's Iran is a big producer of iron ore, timber, other raw materials that, apart from oil, but other raw materials that South Africa is an exporter of commodities. So there'll be some competition in that regard. Iran is also, for example, a producer of motor vehicles. Yes. Thus far, they've been producing their own. Others, like the French that were there before, pulled out during the sanctions era, etc. Having their own skills in that regard could mean that there's a possibility, in the medium term at least, of competition as far as motor car manufacturers are concerned. Should they be locating in a place like South Africa, or increasing their investments here or there instead? For many big investors, in terms of foreign direct investment, if they're looking at the kind of spread of countries where they can put their money, Iran is now available. Which then puts pressure on a country like South Africa, which is looking for that kind of investment.
So it is also a competing economy regardless, Naeem?
Definitely so. And you can see that they're going to make themselves much more competitive. The President, Rouhani, has made it clear that they want to liberalize the economy in certain respects in order to do that. And his first trip with a huge delegation was to Europe. Of course, not to Africa.
Not to Africa.
And he just purchased the largest order of Airbuses that...
You know what, I get you now when you're saying it's not as rosy as we actually might think. Naeem, thank you so much for joining us here and clarifying that issue here. That was Mr. Naeem Jinnah joining us and trying to clarify the lifting of the Iranian sanctions and how, of course, they will impact on South Africa. Now, before we wrap up, corruption in sport dominated international headlines this past week with the latest scandal in cricket. Let's take a look at this insert compiled by Joseph Mahali.
It all started in May last year when the U.S. Department of Justice indicted several FIFA's executives for their involvement in bribery and corruption. The list included former FIFA Vice President Jack Warner, who was alleged to have accepted $10 million in bribes from the South African government to host the 2010 World Cup. Former FIFA President Sepp Blatter and Michel Platini, amongst others, were soon implicated and are serving lengthy bans.
And I tell you, this committee has no right to go against the president. The president of FIFA can only be revealed from his activities by the Congress. And in the next Congress, which is scheduled on the 27th of February, before going to the election of the Congress, of the new president, the former president, still the president, even suspended, I am the president.
While the spotlight was on football, international athletics was rocked by allegation of widespread doping. Russian athletes were banned from international athletics following state-sponsored positive dope tests cover-ups.
For 2016, our recommendation is that the Russian Federation be suspended. In fact, one of our hopes is that they will volunteer that so they can undertake the remedial work in time to make sure that Russian athletes can compete under a new framework, if you like. If they don't, then it has to play itself out, and the outcome may be that there are no Russian track and field athletes in Rio.
The turn of the new year saw the Tennis Integrity Unit being under the microscope for allegations of being ineffective to stamp out corruption in the game. 16 players who have been ranked in the top 50 have been repeatedly flagged over suspicions they had thrown matches in the past decade. An independent review has since been launched to look into the shortcomings of TIU.
It is vital that we repair this damage and that we do so quickly, which is why today we are announcing an independent review that will examine all aspects of tennis's anti-corruption programme, including the Tennis Integrity Unit's work, and which will make recommendations for change. We are determined to do everything we need to do to remove corruption from our sport.
Cricket became the latest sport to be rocked by a scandal, with at least 2 former South African national players implicated for match fixing. The players in question are retired Kulambodi, who was handed a 20-year ban from all cricket-related activities by Cricket South Africa, and wicketkeeper Thami Tsolokile.
CSA thoroughly considered all the relevant factors and determined that a lengthy ban was appropriate. Our attitude to corruption will always be one of zero tolerance. There is no doubt that Mr. Bodi's actions have threatened the integrity and the image of the game that we love most, and he must be handed a strong punishment.
All the affected sporting codes have since committed to stamp out bribery, corruption and match fixing, but will forever remain a challenge. Joseph Mahali, SABC News.
Very interesting indeed. We'd now like to thank all our guests for partaking in our discussions this morning. We are available on YouTube on the SABC's digital platform. If you missed the show, we will be back next week with only the stories that you need to know. I'm Alicia Aali. This is Media Monitor on SABC News. Goodbye. Have a nice Sunday.